So, today we're going to talk about how to make a background for your 2D game inside Unity. Now, I did already record and upload an episode on how to do a parallax background that also moved infinitely when you started running inside the game, but some people wanted me to show how to make a background inside Photoshop, so that's what I'm going to be doing in this episode. This isn't really a Unity tutorial, it's more like a background drawing tutorial for Unity if you make a 2D game. So I'm just going to take this video and kind of place it before the parallax video inside the playlist. And with that said, I will also be listening to some music in this episode. I have this fancy old headset that I use when I sit by the computer. They're not too pretty, but they're pretty good. So now when it comes to drawing a background for a 2D game, there's a lot of different ways you could do it. One way would be the way that we did in the parallax video that you'll jump to in the next episode, which basically means that we're going to draw a 4K background that has some elements in it, some different layers that we can then move in different speeds when we start moving the character inside the game. So with that said, I do have the image that we're using for the next episode, as you can see, but I'll show you how to make something like this step by step from start to finish. The first thing I want to show is something about color theory, because right now, if I were to go and open up color.adobe.com, which is a free place inside Adobe's website, and just go, you can see we have this color wheel, and it shows different types of color modes with different harmony rules when it comes to, finding colors for something like a background. Again, there's a lot of different color modes here, but we'll just sort of stick to analog US and sort of pick the color mode that I use for this particular background here. So I'll just sort of take it and I'll just fit it to something I think looks really good. You can always just adjust it or pick some other colors if you want to have something else for your background. I'm just sort of gonna figure out how I want it to be. I'm gonna be comparing back and forth and just kind of be like, trying to figure out what I want it to. I think something like this might be really good. So what I'll do then is I'll take a screenshot and then I'll paste it inside Photoshop, and then I have a color palette I can pick from when I draw my background. Now, before we can bring in the color palette, we do need to create a new project because this is one that I have already created for the next episode. So I'll go up to File, I'll say New, and I want to make this in 4K. And the whole reason that I want to make it in 4K is because if you pick something less than that, and you then at a later point with your game want to make it into 4K, then it's not as good to scale upwards, but you can very easily scale downwards. So when you start by making your art, you should always make it 4K, so you can always scale it down if needed, since scaling up would just blur out your background and it wouldn't look so sharp. So I have this 4K setting over here, and I'm going to set the resolution to 72. The reason I'm picking 72 is because if you make it too big, like 150 or 300, then it's also going to be a lot heavier for your game to run. So I'm going to pick 72, and I'm just going to say create, and then we have a blank canvas here. So now I can actually take my color palette, I'll just bring it in here. I just saved it on my computer, I'm just bringing it in, and I'll place it somewhere up in the corner. I'll also go ahead and take the layer, just sort of lock it so we can't drag it or mess with it or do any sort of thing to it to mess it up at some point. So with that, we now have a artboard that is ready to be drawn to make a background for our game. Now, if you were to take a look at the final product, you'll see that I did include different layers. Something to bear in mind with Photoshop is that you do have something called a PSB file, which means that you can save your Photoshop file and then bring it into Unity directly. And it's going to be a Unity-friendly version where Unity automatically takes the layers and creates different sprites for that inside the sprite when you import it into Unity. However, when it comes to creating a background, there's going to be issues with doing it as a PSB file. So you will actually, as a background, from what I know, need to export every single layer as a PNG file and then bring it inside Unity after that. So as you can see here with the final product, you can see that I have the foreground as one layer. I have the next part of the background as one layer, and then the next one, then the next one, then the clouds, and the background. Now in this case here, we don't need to have a background color because we're just going to pick one inside Unity in the next episode. But just so we can see what we're dealing with here, it's nice to have a background color that shows inside Photoshop. So going back to our project, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to make sure it's below my color palette so I can actually pick from it. And what I'll do is I'll take my selection tool, or the polygonal lasso tool is called, and I'll just select an area inside my artboard that I want to be the foreground. And something you need to keep in mind with the foreground is also that you don't want it to be too variant in its steepness across the horizontal line, because your character might disappear behind it unless you want to have a hill or something that the character needs to go behind. So just sort of draw, make sure that I'm somewhere not on the middle, but just a little bit below. And I'll just make, a little bit of a jagged edge going across here. Now, there's actually a tip I have for you before we start doing this, which I should have done when I created my background, that I just realized now is probably a better way to do it. You can take a square tool, or rectangle tool is called, and just sort of draw it across so you have a line that shows a complete horizontal line that's not curved or anything. Create a new layer, and then from that line you start selecting from it. So we don't want to have something that looks like this and then goes down like this and then this, because this is too much, right? So instead we want to create something that's a little bit more even. So when we go across, I can go something like this. You have to keep in mind, the further away from the black line you go, or the black area, the more your character is going to be hidden when he runs across the ground. So if you want the feet to be showing, then this is not going to have the feet showing, okay? So we're just going to draw across and make something that looks a little bit nice. So something like this. Maybe some jaggedness here and there, so everything doesn't look too similar. There we go. Just kind of feel your way with it. You don't have to do it exactly like I'm doing it. That would actually kind of defeat the point. Something I do recommend doing here at the end is make sure you align it up with the last pixel. Just zoom all the way in. And that is going to make sense in a second, because when I close it off, we do want to make sure that our environment, if I were to take this entire background, make a copy of it and put it next to itself, that it is seamless, which means that it continues out and looks like it's an infinite background. So I just want to make sure we go in here, just close it off, so you have a selection going, like so. And then I'll just sort of paint it in, and I want to pick a color from my palette here. So if we were to take my, we could take the paint bucket tool, but I like to use my brush. Just increase the size. You do that by holding down Alt on your keyboard and then right clicking, and then up and down is the softness, and then left and right is the size. So with this selected, I'll just pick the green foreground, and I just kind of go across, like so. With that painted, I can now take my rectangle tool, which is my ruler in this case, to make sure I get an even line. I'll just sort of bring it up here to create the next part of the background. If we were to take a look at what I have here, you can see that I have brought it up pretty far. But what you'll notice in my next episode is that I do actually decide to bring it closer together. So what we can do is just keep it something like here. Say okay. Then I'll draw the next part of the background. So I'll just create a new layer. Make sure it's behind our foreground. And again, we want to make sure when we start that we hit our ruler to make sure that everything is seamless at the end. So I'll just put it here. Make sure we go out. So we hit that first pixel there in between the non-black and the black. Then I'll just sort of draw out again. And in this case, I actually want to have some mountains. You know what? Let's go ahead and create some hills. Did my voice just crack there? I think it did. We can create some hills, just so we don't have mountains all over the place. I think hills would be better. And these don't have to be really close up against each other. You'll actually see when I zoom out, I may actually have made the hills a little bit too small. I'll just bring it out. Make sure the hills are here. Like so. And then of course at the very end, we want to bring it together by hitting that last pixel. You don't have to do this with the last pixel. But it just sort of skips a little bit of rework once we get done with the whole thing. So I do like to kind of do it this way. I'll bring it down, across, and bring it together. Then I'll take my pencil, pick a new color, and just sort of fill it in. Like so. Then I'll take my rectangle, and just like before, I'll bring it up. And this time, I do want to create some mountains. So these are hills. Now I want to create mountains, right? So what we can do is we can again take the polygonal lasso tool and just sort of do the same thing. Make sure you do actually create a new layer so we don't draw on top of it. Zoom in to make sure we get it just right. Like so. And just kind of make some hills. Maybe we should zoom out so we can see the full picture. So mountains would be a little bit more, at least in my head, would be a little bit more, I think they need to be a little bit bigger, first of all. A little bit more jagged is what I'm looking for. Make a mountain here, make a mountain there. Could go below the hill. That would only create some differentiation in the art. Cross. Maybe go till here, bring it up. Let's make sure we have the mountain here. Like so. Just create some variety to make sure everything is like you want it to. And again, you don't have to draw it exactly like I am. Just kind of draw something you like. Bring it in, make sure we close it off at the end here. Right. Close the entire selection and take the paint, the brush tool, it's called. Pick the middle color, fill it in. Man, I should have used this one for my next tutorial. This is turning out better than the previous one. So with this, let's go ahead and move up the rectangle tool again. And I do think we'll create one more instance of hills. Let's just double check this. 1, 2, 3. We go back. There's 1, 2, and then we're creating the third one here. So I'll just bring it up again. Then I think I'll create some smaller mountains in the back here because it is further away. So maybe the mountains should be a little bit smaller. At least I think so. If you don't think so, make them bigger. It is an artistic tutorial, so there's no right answer here. It is more of a, do what you like type of thing. I did take color theory and design classes back at my university many years ago, but I was never really a designer. And I did actually end up trying out different art styles from different teachers around the internet. And one guy that really impressed me with his art, because he makes art that is more fit to my natural art style. Because we all have an art style, right? We just, some people don't think they can draw, but we can all draw. We just need to find the right style. And his particular style is something that I think really worked out for me. Now, I did say I was going to make these smaller. So I'm a little bit confused about where to place things. Just make it like this. Again, you can see I'm like playing around with things here just to make it look right. So just kind of play around with it. Make sure it looks like the way you want it to look like. Make it big over here. Then I close it off at the end. I think I'll do this, this, and this. There we go. And then I'll take my pencil tool, pick the next color in the line, and just sort of draw it in. Now for the background, as you can already tell, the colors don't look exactly like this. I actually think the new result here looks a lot better because there's a lot more variety in the colors. But for now, let's go ahead and make a new layer. This time we'll take the paint bucket tool, then we'll pick the last color and just draw it in, like so. Now, a lot of times when you have art like this, you look at it and you think, well, you know, this doesn't look half bad, but we also want to create a little bit of gradients. We want to create a little bit of maybe some outline or some shadows or something, just to make sure everything looks a little bit more like it has depth to it. So what I'll do is I'll start out by, first of all, taking my mountains in the background. I'll just double click the layer. And as you'll see, I open up the layer styling. In here, we can go ahead and mess with the gradient of this particular layer. We can also mess with a shadow. We can mess with a glow. I'll go ahead and say I want to have an inner shadow. I want the inner shadow to go straight from the top. So I'll say 90 degrees. And I want to size it out a little bit. Something like this. Playing around with the choke. I think the choke should be 0. Stretch it out a little bit more, like so. Around 120, I think, is good. What I'll do then is I'll change the color. I could pick out a background here, so it kind of looks like it's fading into the background, which I think is pretty nice. I'll say okay. Just play around with it for a little bit more. I think 140 might actually be perfect. So 140. I like a even number. Then I want to do the same thing, so I'm going to take the next layer, double click it, and this time, because we already messed with it, we do actually have the settings saved. So I'll just say we have a inner shadow. I'll change the color. We could change it to this one to make it fade in with that particular mountain, but let's go ahead and say we want to have some different color. So I'll just go ahead and say I want to have a slightly darker version of the background. I think something that looks slightly darker might actually be better. Something like this. And we'll just say okay. Then I'll take the next layer. I'll do the same thing. Open it up. Say inner shadow. And I'll just go ahead and pick a different color. Now this one that I have right here does actually look quite good. But let's go ahead and pick something just to give it a little bit of highlight and say okay. And then we have the foreground, which is not that one. It is this one, layer 1. Do an inner shadow. And we'll do the same thing. Just gotta make sure we pick the right color. And then darken it just a little bit. We don't want to do it too much, otherwise it's gonna look too harsh. Something like this, I think is really good. With this done, there's one more thing I want to do. I want to make sure I pick the background and go into layer styling again. This time I want to create a gradient overlay. So I'm going to select it and say okay. And then inside the blend mode, I want to set it to multiply. And I want to choose another gradient. This one is going to be basics, black and white. And then I want this one to come in from the bottom, which is, of course, which means that we set it at a 90-degree angle. I had to mess around with it just to see where it came from. And then we can draw in the gradient from the bottom here. I'll just turn up the opacity, like so. And as you can see, we can actually kind of play around with the scaling, have it come from down below. And I'll just go ahead and turn it down just a little bit, because we just want to have a teeny bit of shadow. We don't want to overdo it. Something like, I think 30%. Scaling could be set to around 30% as well. And with this, we now have some gradient just to distance the mountains a little bit further to create a little bit more depth. And with that, I'm going to say okay. I'm going to jump to the next one. And now we can just reapply. So I'll reapply my gradient overlay. It does not save the settings apparently, so I do need to go in and do it again. So I'll choose the basics. And I'll just go ahead and turn it down to 30. Just so we have everything set up like it was before. 30% up here. And make sure it's set to multiply. Now here, I do want to change the scaling a little bit, because it is slightly different when it comes to the size of the layer. So we do need to make adjustments. Let's go ahead and turn down the opacity as well to 20% instead. And I think I'll set the percent in scaling to 20 as well. I'll say okay. And then I'll do it for the next layer as well. And this is going to be the exact same process. So we want to make sure we choose a gradient overlay, multiply. So with this, we kind of see a theme. I might need to put this to 10%. 10% for the scaling as well. And make sure that we have everything set up like it's supposed to. Multiply. We could actually go ahead and increase the opacity quite a bit just to see what we're dealing with. think something like, actually this time I think 60% of the opacity, and the scaling should probably be maybe around 25. Again, play around with it. Try and get something that you like. Your percentages are probably not going to be like mine, but you can kind of look at the photo and see, you know, are you kind of getting the same result as me, and then judge from there. I do also want to create a gradient for the foreground. So I'm going to go into gradient. And something you could do if you really wanted to is you could go into greens and just pick something that looks, you know, a little bit different, and then it's just set up for you. But let's go ahead and stick with the basics here. So I'll pick the darker one, and I'll just scale it down. Make sure we get something that we like. I think I'll set this one to 20%. And I'll just set it to 60% in scaling and say okay. I'll go ahead and let's say we pick the back layer here, the one with the mountains. I'll right click, say convert to smart objects, which basically means that we now have this entire layer in one layer, no matter how many changes we make to it. So I'll show what I mean, because I probably just confused you even more. If I double click on the layer by clicking the photo, you'll see that it opens in a new tab, which basically means that we can now make changes to this, and it'll appear inside our main project without those changes being visible inside the layer itself. Now, something I want to mention when it comes to creating these smart objects is that you will need to know how to make smart objects inside Photoshop, because if I were to take this entire project, let's say I'm making a player character or something, and I save it as a PSP file, import it into Unity, then if you were to add any sort of layer styling like the gradients and the inner shadows, these would not show inside Unity, because these are a Photoshop specific feature that does not translate to Unity. So if you were to import this into Unity, it would actually look like this inside Unity. So in order to actually make these visible, you do need to convert all of these to smart objects. So I'll just go ahead and do that. Convert to smart object and convert to smart object like so. So now it would actually look like it needs to look inside Unity if it were to export as a PSP file. Now, something that you notice from my artboard, the one that I used inside my tutorial in the next video, is that I do have trees. So what I can do is I can open up these smart objects. I'll just close these tabs here. I'll just open up the back one. I'll just kind of take my selection tool, or the polygonal lasso tool it's called, zoom in. I'll just kind of like create some trees, just like you see that I did inside the other one. I'll just create a tree here, just to get a little bit of differentiation, like so, like so. Just kind of play around with it until you get something that you personally think looks really good. And once you've done that, you know, just kind of save it. Make sure you save it, otherwise it's not going to apply inside your other main project. So I'll just go ahead and finish this one, and then I'll meet you at the end once I have all of these created. So with this, I now have something that looks like trees. I'll just highlight everything in. And the wonderful thing about using layer styling is that if I were to take my brush tool and paint something in, actually we do need to make sure we have the right color selected. So let me just go back over here, choose from my color palette, which was this one here. And I start painting in, all the layer styling is actually going to be applying. So if we were to unselect, we now have trees. Make sure you save, otherwise it's not going to apply. And as you'll see, we now have trees going on in the background here. So do that to every single layer. I will go ahead and skip that for now, and I will see you guys in a second once I've done it as well. Just open up a new layer and get started again with this one. So with this, I now have something that looks somewhat like a background with a little bit of variance in tree coloring, and you know, so the background isn't so monotone. And with this, we now have one more step left to do, which is that if you were to take my current game, the one that we've been building together, and take a look at how the character looks, because something that's important to do is to make sure that the entire game, the background, the characters, the items in the environment, everything needs to fit together and have the same style. Because it doesn't make sense if you have a character that has a black outline, like we do right now in our game, and the background does not have a black outline. So what I'll do is I'll enter just one of the layers. I pick the one in the furthest back here, and I'll just duplicate the layer. I'll take the bottom one. I will enable color overlay, so it's a black color. Click OK. And then I'll take the top layer and move it to down. Save it. I'll take the next one. Do the same thing. Duplicate it. I will enable color overlay, make sure it's dark, and move the top layer to down, just by clicking down twice on your keyboard. Then I'll do the same thing for the last one here. And basically what we're doing, and there's probably a better way to do this, by the way. If I were to create let's say I don't know, outer glow or something, it would actually go and mess with the borders here to make it not seamless anymore, which is why I'm doing it this particular way. So there's a reason behind me doing it in a very caveman fashion style, of just creating a color overlay and moving it twice down. It's because it needs to work with seamlessness once we do actually get to that part. I do also want to make sure that my foreground, which is this one right here, has the same thing. So I'll just go ahead and duplicate and have a solid black color and 2 down. So with this, we now have something that looks a lot closer to how our character looks like inside the game. Again, there's probably other ways to create outlines like this, but this is the way that I think is probably the quickest way to do it. I do think that this one does have quite of a thick black outline. So let's see if we can't change that. There we go. And with this, we now have one more thing left we need to do. If I were to go inside my main project file, go down and click on my background, I want to create another layer, and I want to make this into a cloud layer. So I'm going to take my pen tool, just resize it down a little bit, and make sure we have a white color picked. Now I'll just go across from the side over here. Actually, this one should probably not lead together, because we want to make it seamless. If you want to do so, make sure that it goes in and ties in very neatly with everything. We have something weird going on here with this background here. I think for some reason I might have highlighted something wrong. Let me just go ahead and delete that. I'll just take the eraser tool and just erase that, because we do not want to have that as part of what is going on here. Like so. So going back to our cloud layer, I want to make sure that we draw clouds, and I just want to make sure that it goes in and fits in with right at the end of the mountain there. Make sure we have some more clouds. Again, do this whatever style that you might like to see it in. I'm just gonna go ahead and draw it like this. Just so we have something. And again, at the end here, just kinda fit it in. There we go. Take a last look if there's something else that you might want to change inside your art style here. So now with this, all you need to do now is you essentially just need to export each layer individually as a PNG image, and then you'll actually have everything ready for the next episode. And the way you would export it as a PNG layer would just be to deselect everything except one layer. So for example, the clouds that we have here, go to File, Export, Export As, and then you just simply export it as a PNG. And then save it somewhere inside your computer where you have all these different files, so you have them ready to import into Unity. So just go ahead and save them one by one. Once you've done that, take the next one, Then once you've saved that one, take the next one. And then at the end, you'll have all the different files you need for your background. So that is how you can make a very simple background for people who are not very artistic like me, and get on with the next episode if you want to follow along and create a parallax background with infinite moving background. There's actually a last thing we might want to check here, which is if I were to take all these different layers just to check things, and if I were to take it and duplicate it, let's actually make sure we extend the background a little bit. So I'll just stretch it out. And what you want to do is you want to take these, move it out to the side, and double check that everything is in fact seamless. So as you can see, when I put them together, it should be seamless. As you can see, there's a little bit of gradient going on here, so you do need to click the layer styling and mess with the gradient a little bit to make sure that everything seamlessly ties together. Once you've done that, you should be ready for the next episode and have everything you need in order to make a parallax infinite background. So I hope you enjoyed this video. That is basically everything I have for you when it comes to art, and I will see you in the next one.